Alright guys, so in this lesson, I want to talk about ways in which we can reduce the amount of code and simplify our code here. And in large part, that's going to involve something called the spread operator. So go ahead and get hold of the starting sandbox and fork your own copy. Now, to begin, I want to show you what the spread operator actually does. I'm going to write my code inside the index.js. So let's say that we had an array called citrus, and it was equal to various citrus fruits, such as lime, lemon, and orange. And then I had another constant called fruits, which is going to be another array. So let's say apple, banana, and coconut. And what if what I want to do is to be able to add all of the content in the citrus array into my fruits array at the end. So I can put the lime into the coconut and shake it all up. Well, in this case, what I could do is I could individually go through this array and push each of those items to my fruits array. But there's a much easier way of doing this. I can simply use the ES6 spread operator, which basically is just 3 full stops like this, and then I can add the name of the array that I want to expand into this position. So in my case, it's citrus. And so now if I go ahead and log the value of my fruits array, then you'll see that it's equal to apple, banana, coconut, so the original array that I've typed out manually, and then it's got all of the rest of the items that came from the citrus array. And what it did is it took the citrus array, expanded it or spread it into individual items, and added each of those items into this position where I specified ... citrus. Now you can of course change the position. So if you wanted apple to be the first item and then you wanted to insert the citrus array, then you can do it like this. And now when it gets printed, you can see lime, lemon, and orange now goes after apple and before banana. Now you can use the spread operator with objects as well. For example, if I had a constant called full name, and it was set to equal to first name being James, last name is Bond, and then I created another object called user, and I wanted to be able to insert the full name object into my user object. Then I could simply do ... and then the name of the object I want to insert, and then any other items that I want. So maybe I'd have an ID, and maybe I'd have a username of James Bond 007. And now this user object is going to be comprised of all of the elements inside the full name object, as well as any other ones that I've misspelt, such as the ID and username. So let's go ahead and log the user object, and you can see that this object has fname, lname, ID, and username. Now notice how this is not the same as if we simply just inserted this object full name into this user object. What happens in this case is when we log the user object, you can see that we get a new object being nested inside our user object. And now we've got something with a key of full name and a value of this object. This is not what we want. Instead, what we wanted was to spread all of the items inside the full name object into our user object. And so they all end up in the same object like so. Now, if this reminds you of maybe a pain point that we had in our previous app, then you are spot on. This is exactly what we're going to use to be able to simplify the code that we've got inside our handle change, which at the moment, even though it looks very clear, it's a bit too long for what it's trying to achieve. What can we do here instead? Well, instead of having all of these if statements, we can simply delete all of it, and then we can return an object where we use the spread operator to add in the previous value of the object. So be it the last name property or the first name property or the email property, whatever it is that we had previously. And then we're going to add in a new value for whichever name of input that got passed in and the value that the user typed in. At this point, you might think this code would just work as it is, but if we actually try to run this and open up my console so I can see my state hooks, notice how if I start writing first name, nothing actually happens, but it seems like something is being added with a key of name. What's going on here? Well, it's literally interpreting this as the fact that you want to create a new key value pair where the key is the word name. And instead, this part is actually saying it's declared, but it's never read. So we're not actually able to tap into this right here. Now, you might think that the solution is maybe we'll just get straight to the point. We'll say event.target.name. And despite my warnings about never using the event inside a set state, you'll notice that this doesn't even work. So whatever it is that we're typing here, it's being interpreted as a string instead of the value of a particular variable or property. What we have to do instead is we need to add the value that we want inside an array syntax. And notice how as soon as I do that, then almost magically, everything starts working exactly the way that it's supposed to. But what's actually happening behind the scenes? Well, notice there's a lot of people who are wondering the same thing, and the best place to find all the other wondering souls is, of course, Stack Overflow. So in this case, this guy has a key, which is a variable, and it holds a string value. He wants to use that string as the key when he creates a new object, but it doesn't seem to work because it's just taking the word key instead of the actual value that's stored inside key. So exactly the same thing that we're experiencing. And down here, you'll notice a highly upvoted answer telling you how you might do this before ES6. Well, you could create a new object and then use this array syntax to be able to set it as the key of the object. But luckily for us, because we're using Babel, because we're using React, and because we are now no longer in before 2018, we can simply just use this new feature where we add a set of square brackets in front and then put our key variable inside to get the actual value of the variable, rather than for JavaScript to just interpret it as a literal string. So I'm going to link to the Stack Overflow question, and if you're curious, then have a read about it. But essentially, this is going to be the syntax that you're going to get used to. We've got the name that comes from our event.target.name, and we're simply adding a set of square brackets in order to get hold of the value of this variable, rather than using it like what we did here when we create object literals, where we just add a string as the key. So if you wanted to, you could in fact shorten this code even further. For one, we could get rid of this return, right? Because we only have one thing being returned in here, which is this single object, we could actually get rid of this outer curly brace, this corresponding closing brace, this semicolon, and only end up with this object like so. But of course, JavaScript gets confused because it thinks that this is the body of your function. So instead, we have to wrap it inside a set of parentheses to tell it, nope, this is actually an object. And we're just using very, very terse syntax to try and achieve this. Now, even though this is very, very short, we're now down to 2 lines. I don't actually really like this syntax because it's kind of confusing as to what's going on. There's so many curly braces, so many of these parentheses, it's a bit confusing. So I think simplifying code is great when it keeps its meaning. So what I would prefer is to keep it like so, where we have a function that we're passing over to set contact. It gets hold of the previous value and returns a JavaScript object that includes all of the items from the previous JavaScript object, the previous value, and then adding on the new key value pair with the key being the name of the event.target and the value being the new value that's been typed in. This, even as it is going to take some getting used to. So have a play around with the code, and once you're ready, head over to the next lesson where I've got a challenge for you to try and solidify this even more.